Hi everyone, my name is Philip Meissner. Welcome to What's Next. In a world overflowing with data, are we forgetting one of the most powerful decision tools, our intuition? Today we explore how intuition can help us navigate complexity, make better choices, and lead with confidence. Our guest is Hrund Gunnsteinsdottir, an Icelandic thought leader, author, and award-winning entrepreneur. If you want to understand how you can use your intuition to navigate complexity, this conversation is for you. Hrund, welcome to What's Next.
Thank you so much, Philip. It's an honor to be here with you.
So, Hrund, we've had many conversations about transformation and intuition. One thing that stuck with me is that you said that change does not start with systems, it starts with people. What role does intuition play in this?
Yeah, thank you for this great starting question. So systems don't change themselves, right? They don't have a mind on their own. Things are changing faster than our minds can even perhaps grasp, let alone our systems. So we need our minds, we need our thinking, we need deep insights into what needs to change, what isn't working in the world today, how can we do things differently, what's happening around us. For all this, intuition is really key. So intuition is fundamental to our intelligence. And, in order to reason well, we need good intuition. And without intuition, there wouldn't be much innovation. So that's really to come up with valuable insights. When we've made our greatest discoveries in the history of mankind, when we innovate and when we make changes, this is when intuition is the critical component of our thought processes.
And today, every decision maker is really overwhelmed with information. And every day there's so much happening, news in geopolitics, news in technology, etc., you name it. How can intuition help us navigate this complexity?
Well, first of all, I think in order to navigate this complexity, we need to be aware of the importance of having clarity of mind. We need to be firmly anchored and keeled in our own present selves as we go through these turbulent times. So on a very biological level, we need a regulated nervous system in order for our brains to do the job that it wants to do in order to navigate uncertainty. And secondly, intuition is, we want to be able to see the big picture as well as the details. We want to be able to sense what's on the horizon. We want to be able to just notice trends that are emerging, which do not fit into our predetermined or deliberate set of minds.
Yes.
And for this, intuition is also very important. And also, it's hard. Sometimes we don't even have time to collect data to take good decisions about what we need to do in the world today. And so there's a lot of conversation, and I'm sure you've had these too. It's so important to trust data, to be based on science and facts. But sometimes we can't collect data in time. And sometimes the way that we collect data is not giving space for the new things that are arising. And so from the world of intuition and intelligence, it's important for managers and management, for cultures and corporations and companies and for leaders to remember that there is space for data and analysis, but there also needs to be space for sensing and how we both sense our environment to give space for that and to tune into that, but also to sense make, which is to excel in our domain, just to really make sense out of what we're sensing and the data in our domain that we are working in.
What do most people get wrong about intuition?
Well, I think one of the things that people get wrong a lot of the time is to think that intuition is quick, fast decisions and we don't know where it comes from. That is not entirely true. So intuition is also the birthplace for new ideas and groundbreaking discoveries. And there is so much that we can do in order to harness and hone and gain mastery over intuition. So that's something that I found really, really, really interesting as a challenge to take on and explain to people. There is also this idea that intuition is kind of considered the same as an irrational impulse or instinct, which is not the case. And also that intuition is often considered as one of our cognitive components, like a small component of it, while it is actually fundamental to our intelligence. And I can't underline that enough because, the intuition that we use personally in our personal lives as we navigate through life, take decisions in our personal lives, make sure that we are well and ready to take on the days, is the same intuition that enables us to make the best and smartest decisions. It's the same intuition that enables us to come up with valuable insights and make discoveries.
You talked about the fact that actually many people confuse intuition with gut feeling or even bias. How can we tell the difference and make sure that we use intuition effectively?
Yeah, so this is another great question. So I want to start just by zooming out a little bit. Intuition is an embodied feeling. It's an embodied intelligence. What this means is that intuition taps into our unconsciousness, which is the biggest part of our whole conscious mind, or whole consciousness, sorry. So this means that through our whole body, we are picking up data and sensory information 24/7. And so in order to tap into this, the first basic thing we need to do is to be self-aware and to be able to practice metacognition. And what this means is training ourselves in monitoring and understanding how it is that our intuition speaks to us in a certain context or environment. So when people talk about gut feelings, it's not entirely off, not at all. So sometimes people will describe, there's this famous mountaineer who wanted to climb Everest. He was almost at the top when he decided last minute not to summit. It was a gut feeling that he followed. Where did it come from? It came from a pattern recognition in his unconsciousness that he had developed over time, having done similar things in varying settings. And so our body speaks to us in these ways, which only we can become experts in. But when it comes to biases and fears and wishful thinking, prejudice, it's super important to learn to hone and harness a strong intuition and be able to understand and discern it from these things. So in a way, I've mentioned that it's important to be self-aware and understand how your intuition functions, when it works well and when it doesn't. But when we talk about biases, we have many biases as humans. There are so many, like there are between 200 and 300 or whatever.
Yes.
First of all, we need to know that we have biases. And then secondly, we need to understand at least how some of them work. And in essence, this requires a level of critical thinking. So this is another element of how when you hone and harness your intuition, it's not just something that comes out of nowhere. You actually need to think critically about how you show up in the world and how you take in information, what information you're taking in, because most of them are unconscious, right?
Yes.
And so it's all these things that we need to be aware of.
Okay, so you talked a lot about subconscious, unconscious. So to many listeners, this might sound a little bit spiritual, but there's also a lot of research on the topic, right? So can you maybe share some of the findings that neuroscience has given us about intuition?
Yeah, absolutely. So we take a lot of decisions. We make a lot of choices. We go through the day basing our choices on unconscious hints and signals. And I think for the listener, just to pause a little bit and think about that and remember, at least, it's easy to recollect how that happens. There is a lot of information that we store in our unconsciousness. So neuroscience has also been drawing our attention to the fact that in the information storm that we are living through today, attention is a scarce resource. It's been that for forever for humans, focused attention. It's even scarcer today. And so it becomes more important to be disciplined and more aware of how you pay attention and what you take in, because it's informing your decisions. Understanding that most of the things that we take in as we immerse ourselves in our environments are unconscious, but they're still informing our minds. So just this realization is really important. Another thing that I find super important and fascinating is that neuroscience has been opening up this world to us, which has to do with the mind-body and how we co-regulate as a species. And so, for example, we co-regulate as a species to the extent that if I don't have another human to interact with and co-regulate with, I can literally die from that, you know, so we are a social animal. But I'm also informed by your presence with me. So, for example, when we think about a lot of stress, anxiety, which literally shrinks our brains, when we are in a group of people that suffer from anxiety and stress, we are very prone to start to co-regulate in the same way. Another thing where this comes up in neuroscience is that, you know, many of the things that we know, we first know in our body and then in our cognitive mind. So there are so many indications of how all this works together. And, you know, when you and I are in the same room, we work for a day or we have a conversation or share a same space, we easily start to kind of synchronize the rhythm of our hearts to the same beat, the breathing, you know, it's to that extent that maybe it's interesting to share also with the audience, you know, there's this ecosystem that starts to emerge when we talk about neuroscience, you know, the way that we co-regulate and the way that our body sometimes knows first ahead of our brain and so on and so forth, that there is this writing by psychologists like Gerd Gigerenzer that talk about ecosystem intelligence. And I think that's a very interesting lens and a concept to think about how we take decisions and navigate the world today.
Absolutely. And for our leaders listening today, when they want to apply intuition in their decision-making processes, what would be 3 practical ways they can start applying this concept in their everyday life?
Well, the first thing is always to start with self-awareness. So pay attention to what it is that you pay attention to. Learn to understand how your intuition works. You know, one of the things is that I always recommend for leaders and people in general is to keep a journal.
Okay.
To journal, you can even start with the question, when was the last time I listened to my intuition? Where did I feel it? And what happened as a result? And then change the question to, when was the last time I didn't listen to my intuition? Where did I feel it? It's just turning on that awareness of when your intuition is speaking to you and when you can rely on it and when you shouldn't. I would also say create a balance between sensing and data. So in terms of the VUCA world, in terms of the uncertainty that we are navigating through, it's super important that we practice sensing our environment. This enables us to engage our teams better. This means that as leaders, we don't have all the answers. Ask your stakeholders, ask your team to co-think with you. Be humble that intuition is created in an ecosystem of minds. You know, ask outside of your comfort zone, because in order to sense what's emerging, it's very likely that it's going to come from places that are unexpected.
Yes.
And then thirdly, and this is super important, practice being present. So while we can't be present all the time, I mean, that's just how life is, really practice being present, because you will see this from the literature in business, martial arts, leadership, sports. Presence prepares us for the unexpected in the best way possible. When we are present, we are able to delve into the knowledge and expertise that we have in the clearest possible way and really harness and hone the knowledge that we have, but also the intuition and sense of how things are changing and evolving.
And how can we be present? Is this like living in the moment? Are there other concepts around this? And how can we do this in a day-to-day life when we are overwhelmed with all the stimuli around us in this VUCA world that you mentioned?
First of all, understand how it feels in your body and your mind when you are present. You have to try it at least once. So, okay, this is what it feels like to be present. You can do this by journaling. You can do this with meditation. You can do this when you're running. If you do ceramics, whatever, like puts you in a flow state. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
So flow state is a great indication of that. There are many different ways of practicing being present. And one is simply when you're in a meeting and it seems that everything is going upside down and there is noise inside your head and around you. You can just physically remind yourself that you're sitting in this chair, in this place. You feel your feet on the floor. or you just say your name in your mind to get back to your body, to come home to yourself. Because our mind wanders all the time. It's the most normal thing. But there are small things like that, and there are bigger things like that. But the general rule is understand for you what presence means for you, so that it's easier for you to go into that mindset when you need it in the moment.
Understood. So you mentioned that we are now living in a data-driven world, even AI-driven world. So how can we use intuition and data together for better decision-making outcomes?
Well, I think that, first of all, master both AI and data and intuition. Then understand when AI and data work best and when intuition works better. For example, in a world where you have known knowns, statistics and data work super well. In a world with uncertainty, a well-honed and harnessed mastery of intuition works best. So for example, data in AI is super good at collecting massive amount of information and creating patterns out of it. Or can be massively good in that. It can also be good in bringing together the knowledge that we already have in order to plan how to work in a certain situation. But what intuition has beyond AI and data, maybe just to cut to that as well, is that intuition enables us to add ethics. Intuition enables us to come up with insights and strategic thinking and planning. It enables us to innovate and be creative. So, for example, when you're working with AI, I mean, there's so many interesting research coming up now that show that when we work together, like use these things together, we come up with the greatest, shall we say, performance, and we can work most effectively as well. But it's important to also just to ask yourself questions. For example, when you prompt AI, consult with your intuition first. We do that anyway, just to ask the right questions. And then when AI or data comes up with results, ask questions like, what do I think about this? What does my team think about this? Does this make sense? What if we put this beside something that is happening elsewhere? How are these trends speaking together? So think critically about the information that's coming up. And as I said before, AI data versus intuition, it's very much about practice and science. It's very much about data and sensing. It's very much about analyzing and applying your intuition. Philip, every time that we are talking about intuition in this conversation, we are always talking about a well-honed, harnessed intuition, which is a muscle that we've practiced mindfully, consciously, because we want it to work and we understand physically how it works.
Hi there. Thank you so much for listening. If you're enjoying What's Next and find value in these conversations, I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to subscribe or follow the podcast. It's the best way to make sure you never miss an episode, and it helps us bring more incredible insights to you. Your support truly means the world to me. Thank you for being part of this journey. So you mentioned already 3 things that people can do. So it's journaling, it's being present, and then just, being aware also of these things. Are there any other things that the audience can do? You mentioned meditation as a third thing. So what can our audience do to really train this muscle in their everyday practice?
Yeah, so in the 3 things you mentioned, I think the second or third one was to learn how to combine, practice and science, learn how to combine data and sensing. So sensing is about being aware of how you pick up sensory data, information, how you read people, and documenting your intuition with journaling, like you mentioned. Sense making is building expertise in your domain, where intuition also plays a role. And so I think these are the 3 things you need to do: journaling, practice presence, and combine and balance data and sensing.
So it's really something that you can learn, like a muscle that you train. So the longer you do it, the more you do it, the better you become.
Yes, and it's not about the hours you put in, like you have to do it for 10,000 hours and then you become an expert. That's actually a myth and it's untrue. I always advise people to just do this gradually, make it part of their life. People like me give other people advices on how to integrate it into their life. I speak about the two rhythms, which are more or less what I said, data and intuition or sensing. And to find a balance for that in your life is truly important. It always happens first on a personal level, whether you're a leader or navigating your own life as a leader in your own life. And then learning how to apply it to day-to-day work, depending on your work, learning how to engage your team and creating a culture around this is something that has and will continue to give companies and organizations that edge that we need to navigate today's uncertainty.
So can intuition be a competitive advantage for organizations?
Absolutely. So a well-honed intuition can be a competitive advantage for organizations. So let's take something that's a very close example for most people and your listeners. With innovation, it gives competitive advantage. Innovation doesn't happen without intuition. This we know. But in order to read the tide of time and navigate uncertainty, which is geopolitical and it's in the markets and everywhere, it's super important that we trade our colleagues and people and our teams in sensing the environment and what's happening, to read outside the comfort zone, to cross silos, because we've created lots of silos when it comes to expertise, which also means that in a world where borders are melting away and being created anew, it's super important to see beyond the silence and cross-fertilize between them and see the big context. So training these skills is something that companies are doing to some extent, and some can become better at it. And then AI is another addition. And just to add, Philip, because it's like, some years ago, it was super important to know as much as you could, read lots of books, know as much as you can. Now we have access to so much knowledge, for example, through AI. I think is in many ways a beautiful development. So the challenge for us is to really learn how to synthesize information, connect dots, often unexpected dots, which requires us to have a very curious and open mind. And back to the person and the individual, you need to have a regulated nervous system, literally, in order for your brain to even imagine thinking creatively or innovatively or sensing the tide of time or coming up with insights.
Are there situations in which we should not rely on intuition?
Yes, another great question.
Which ones?
So if you are emotionally imbalanced, you're angry, you haven't slept, you're totally in love, that's an indication that you should sleep on it and not rely on your intuition. There is also, in order to, I need to look for the word here. Yeah. So for probabilistic judgment, I know this often comes up when people talk about intuition, for example, in cognitive sciences. For probabilistic judgment, intuition is not your best bet.
Yes.
So rather rely on AI and data and so on and so forth. Impulses and addictions. If you're addicted to something, your addiction will always tell you this is a great intuition. That's not the time to listen to your intuition. When you're under pressure, financial, in your personal life or otherwise, it's super important to be aware that that's not the best moment to follow your intuition. So if you can, tune into that state of presence, tune into that regulated nervous system, sleep on it, go for a walk, whatever. But sometimes we can't do that.
Yes.
And then having trained that muscle already makes it much quicker for us to tap into it in the moment in times of pressure. And the solid awareness that the pressure is confusing our minds is super important to know. And do your best to access clarity of mind in these moments.
Okay, I understand. In your book and in your documentary, Insay, you show how intuition can help us solve today's big challenges. And there are many, from climate change to conflicts around the world. So what is the way forward here?
So the way forward here is to really give permission and create a culture around combining rational thinking, analysis, and data with sensing, sense-making, and intuition. That's really important. So if we just think about the global challenges that we are faced with, and you've mentioned, they are all characterized by the fact that they are interconnected and they are complex, right? So when we think about something that's complicated versus complex, something that's complicated is like a machine or a car. We can take it apart into its pieces. We can assemble it back together again so that it works as before. We can't do that with our global challenges, humans or the rainforest. So there's a different sort of logic that requires us to navigate it differently. And in order to understand and tune into complexity, we need to have developed that mindset that is like firmly aligned with intuition. And we know how to harness the two rhythms of analysis and intuition and when to switch between them. Because research shows that this is when we master mental agility. This is when we master the human genius. This is what enables our Nobel laureates to reach their greatest discoveries. And this is what any seasoned CEO will relate to. Just knowing when to go into which rhythm.
You started your career at the United Nations and worked, among other things, also in conflict resolution. Did you ever second guess your intuition in these super high stake decisions and environments?
Yes, I guess, this is, I think all the time. When you work in an environment like this, it's all about transition. You're going from a communist society to a democratic society into free market. People are healing from war. They are in deep polarization and deep fighting. And when I look back, what we succeeded in doing during this time had so much to do with building trust, building collaboration, building partnerships around a mutual future vision. I was young when I started working with the UN, so I didn't have this experience that you have later in life. And so my intuition was definitely strongest when it came to working with people and finding out like how to move the agenda and building partnerships around things. And when it came to taking practical decisions, when I had an intuition that something would work, I always asked my colleagues and like, is this a good idea? Is it not? How would you, making sure that there's an ownership of the decision as well from others. So it's not just about being correct. It's also about creating the ownership so that it becomes realistic. But the thing that I was really bad at, especially when I lived in Kosovo just after the war, that was being self-aware of the source of good intuition and how to maintain it and how to build it into strength. Because I had no sense of my own borders. And it's almost like I thought I was a machine that could just go on and on and on and on and never needed to fill its tank or anything. So that's a lesson that has really influenced my life. And I know that a lot of people relate to that.
And what advice would you give to leaders under a lot of pressure that are making tough decisions based on your experience?
So research shows basic things like good night's sleep, deep relaxation. And I literally would recommend the yoga nidra session, 20 minutes if you can fit it into your day. Get that deep relaxation to regulate your nervous system. Take time for yourself. It's very counterintuitive when you're busy and under pressure, but really try your best to do that. Take good care of yourself. Be open about your vulnerabilities, where you need help. Be humble. Be humble as a leader when it comes to intuition and engaging your team in decisions. Yeah, be humble, ask around, be open up the table for consultancy with others. I think that's super important because none of us has all the answers. There's going to be a lot of tests and trials along the way in the uncertainty that we're living through. And yeah, so I would take care of yourself, your physical and mental health. Learn to hone and harness your intuition because it will also help you know when to do what, when to rely on your intuition, when not, when to fill your tank, when you don't have to fill your tank, when, there's all these different things.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Most of the things that you mentioned are not in the situation itself, but before preparing for this kind of moment, right?
Yes.
So it's more like a long-term process. And the things that you mentioned should be really integrated into your everyday practice. So you've personally explored the power of intuition for many decades now. What has been your biggest learning in this process?
So some of my biggest learnings are, for example, how fundamental intuition is to our intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
That took me a long time to kind of map that out. And I did it by navigating all different sectors and disciplines and speaking with all these different people through the decades. And so how fundamental it is to our intelligence. What has also been a big discovery for me is that the intuition that we talk about when we talk about well-being and taking good decisions and life choices is the same source of intuition we use to make great discoveries and be great leaders and take smart and wise decisions. Maybe the third thing that I have found to be a very big discovery is that intuition develops over time.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, it's different from instinct.
Mm-hmm.
It develops over time and it's informed by the environment that we immerse ourselves in.
Mm-hmm.
So environment could be virtual, real life, whatever environment that you immerse yourself in.
Mm-hmm.
So what you take in, mostly unconsciously, comes out again.
Mm-hmm. I see.
So there's a lot of responsibility that comes with being the steward of your own attention and also the attention that you pay with your whole body, because that's going to inform your sense of possibility, your sense of your hope, your sense of direction. So many years ago, Philip, I used to think a lot about purpose, and I still do.
Mm-hmm.
But I used to think many years ago that purpose is something that you find at some point in your life and it doesn't change.
Mm-hmm.
But now I've learned that purpose can change because our intuition develops over time and our intuition informs our intelligence and how we navigate the world. So allowing ourselves to be fish in water and to learn and change throughout life is something that I think is super important. And I don't think we can do it if we're not aligned with our intuition.
Yes. You said that change starts from within. What's one thing our listeners can do today to strengthen their intuition and make better choices?
Start listening to your intuition, respect it, respect it and journal about it, honor it and learn to harness it.
Mm-hmm. So one thing is for sure that I learned from this conversation. I will definitely get the journal now.
Yes, please do. Believe me, it's magic.
So Hrund, we like to end this show on a positive note, and we ask all guests the same question. What makes you optimistic about the future?
What makes me optimistic about the future is people, is beauty, and the courage that comes with curiosity and companionship and love for life, for planet, for people, for beings.
So we should be more curious.
Yeah.
Be more curious and listen more to our intuition. And maybe one thing that you said about, be careful what your environment is. Maybe it's less screens and more nature then, or is this something that doesn't really fit into your concept with the intuition?
I think with our environment, just being aware of what it is that inspires us and opens up our mind and makes us happy. Sense of awe is a very powerful feeling that rewires our brains, literally. So I think we all know immediately we can now think about things that do not inspire us and give us energy.
Yeah.
So do more stuff that inspires you and gives you energy.
That's a perfect way to close. And thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your insights into what's next in decision-making and intuition and how it can help us better navigate complexity and uncertainty. To our listeners, stay tuned for more thought-provoking discussions on what's next, where we continue exploring the forces shaping our future. See you next time.
Thank you.